Remember, young man, unceasingly, Father Paisi began without preface, that the science of this world, which has become a great power, has especially in the last century analyzed everything divine handed down to us in the holy books. After this cruel analysis, the learned of this world have nothing left of all that was sacred of old. But they have only analyzed the parts and overlooked the whole, and indeed their blindness is marvelous. Yet the whole still stands steadfast before their eyes, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Has it not lasted 19 centuries? Is it still not a living, a moving power in the individual soul and in the masses of people? It is still as strong and living, even in the souls of atheists who have destroyed everything. For even those who have renounced Christianity and attack it, in their inmost being still follow the Christian ideal, for hitherto neither their subtlety nor the ardor of their hearts has been able to create a higher ideal of man and of virtue than the ideal given by Christ of old. When it has been attempted, the result has only been grotesque. Remember this especially, young man, since you are being sent into the world by your departing elder. Maybe remembering this great day, you will not forget my words, uttered from the heart for your guidance, seeing you are young and the temptations of the world are great and beyond your strength to endure. Well, now go, my orphan. With these words, Father Paisi blessed him. Welcome to Book 4 and the Brothers Karamazov. We just heard the words of Father Paisi over Alyosha, reminding him of his mission to bless the world. And we can see in the words of Father, preparation is being made perhaps for the elder Zosima leaving this life and bequeathing his legacy to this priest, bringing that to Alyosha. So with those words, let's begin and take a look at Book 4, Lacerations. Although this is a short chapter, I think there's quite a bit in here to prepare us for things to come. We've talked about lacerations and what that actually means, and we're going to see how these ruptures are paving the way for the way events are going to unfold. So let's go ahead and look at some of our questions from the handout. Our first question was comparing how the elder and the patriarch are both going to die. We see this with foreshadowing. How do they handle their impending deaths? Because what we see in Dostoevsky's writing is they both have a certain awareness. Perhaps, obviously, with the elder, he is much more aware than Fyodor because he has a prayer life. He's in touch with the divine. But Fyodor Dostoevsky, we have seen in his own strange way, he has access to the divine. Sometimes, of course, it's demonic, but sometimes he does have real awareness that something's going to happen. So how do they handle it? Well, there are scholars who say if you read this opening chapter carefully, there's what we might call Sophoclean irony. So if we think of Sophocles, we talked about him before, but you can think of the story of King Oedipus, this idea of Greek tragedy, people having an awareness of some type of tragedy that's about to occur. The ancient Greeks painted it in ironic terms, and Dostoevsky is picking up on that. He knows his days are numbered on one level of his being. He actually unwittingly quotes from the first psalm, which says, "The ungodly are not so, but they are like chaff, which the wind drives away." So what is going to be driven away? Is he ungodly? There's a lot going on there in that sentence. Always keep in mind, while Fyodor, of course, acts as an enemy of God, Dostoevsky will always leave the door open for redemption. There's no simple answers. There are no simple answers here. We definitely see literary techniques of foreshadowing when the father asks his son, basically, well, will I ever see you again? No, Alyosha will never see his father again. What we just read is the last time Alyosha will ever see his father alive. So as we're reading that, we're getting this sense of what's going to happen. And Dostoevsky is indeed preparing the reader. And I think there is still so much hope in the darkness of this novel, because while the narrator does have some characteristics of being all-seeing, he doesn't see everything. And so who knows what happened to the father in his heart before events occur. We don't know. We do know there's this line from the Psalm that I think just leave it open, that I think in the midst of a tragic family still give us hope. And I think that's part of the brilliance of the artistry of Dostoevsky. Now, what about the elder? What does he do? He knows his end is approaching. He summons his students, he summons his friends to his side. And again, he brings up that theme that is central throughout the novel. What is active love? Remember, this novel is pitting the love in the intellect, let's say, of the Russian intelligentsia, their revolutionary love that's tied to Western ideology. It's in the clouds. It doesn't bend down to help people. Whereas the elder is mentioning active love. And if you remember last time, we talked about a descent and an ascent, always is a theme in this book. This is descending love. Active love goes down to the situation and isn't afraid to help. In fact, it's fascinating in this book, right? There's a Band-Aid on a finger. It's just a concrete example of active love. Now, if you notice the elder, we can see as he's dying, have you noticed he has supporters and detractors in the monastery? This is real life. This is the church. This is how it is. Because the elder is close to death, anything that can be construed as a miracle will be seen as proof of his sanctity and his sainthood, and could perhaps make the monastery famous. However, this is a double-edged sword, and we're going to see what Dostoevsky does with this when we try to be too simple or too judgmental and lack humility when we're trying to judge the sanctity of certain people. What would a miracle mean? If there was a miracle as he's dying, would that mean he's holy? The novel does not give easy answers, and you are going to have to judge for yourself as you keep reading. I think it's interesting, on a side note, to compare the elder to Father Ferapont. What did you think of him? He fasts, he obeys the disciplines, but he is quite cranky. He's not a fan of the elder. Dostoevsky's presenting this before us and giving us that reminder, as I mentioned to you last time, in the church, the weeds and the wheat grow together. And we can think of St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 4, I believe. It is God who is the judge. We don't pass judgment on each other. God is the judge. And Dostoevsky is reminding us of that important point through this powerful character of the elder. Okay, moving on to Katerina. What has she resolved to do and why? Well, she has decided that even if Dmitri marries that creature, of course, that creature is Grushenka, she is going to stay with him. And I think it's worth reading what she means by staying with him. So I'm going to jump ahead here. I believe it is chapter 5, A Laceration in the Drawing Room. think it's worth reading this at length because we're going to be drawing from this. I'm on page 138. And she says, I'm in the middle of the page. In such affairs, Alexei Fyodorovich, in such affairs, the chief thing is honor and duty and something higher. I don't know what, but perhaps even higher than duty. I may all be put into words. I've already decided, even if he marries that creature, she began solemnly, whom I never can forgive, even then I will not abandon him. Henceforward, I will never abandon him, she cried, breaking into a sort of pale, hysterical ecstasy. Not that I would run after him continually, get in his way and worry him. Oh no, I will go away to another town, where you like, but I will watch over him all my life. I will watch over him all my life unceasingly. When he becomes unhappy with that woman, and that is bound to happen quite soon, let him come to me and he will find a friend, a sister. Only a sister, of course, and so forever. But he will learn at last that his sister is really his sister who loves him and has sacrificed all her life to him. I will gain my point. I will insist on his knowing me and confiding entirely in me without reserve, she cried, in a sort of frenzy. I will be a god to whom he can pray, and that at least he owes me for his treachery and for what I suffered yesterday through him. And let him see that all my life I will be true to him. And the promise I give him, in spite of his being untrue and betraying me, I will become nothing but a means for his happiness, or, how shall I say, an instrument, a machine for his happiness. And that for my whole life, and that he may see that all his life. That's my decision. Ivan Fyodorovich fully approves me. So this passage has so much here for us to draw from. We can see here her decision is she's going to stay loyal to Dmitri. But why? And that's going to lead to our next question, because Katerina, of course, is drowning in self-deceit, self-deception. And then she's caught in this web of lies, actually, with Ivan. They're both caught in this web of lies. Alyosha, who keeps saying, I don't know anything about love. What am I doing? I don't know anything about love. He's in the middle of that. And all of a sudden, he has an illumination and he figures out what is happening. And it's going to, of course, all be connected to this word laceration, which I'll return to that word laceration. But let's look at what Alyosha realizes. He realizes she does not love Dmitri. She's only loving him from strain, or whatever translation that you want to use, laceration, because she has convinced herself. And who does she love? She loves Ivan. She torments Ivan because she does love him. But she is settled with, or I shouldn't say settled, she is determined to triumph over Dmitri. This is all about a triumph of the will. And I can't help but think, as I study the dynamics between the sexes in the novel, it does remind me of the dynamics that were presented in the 19th century in Marxist literature. Because in Marxism, there's definitely this dynamic of oppression and finally a rising up and the weak taking over the strong. It's a dynamic of power crushing revolution. And this unfortunate dynamic, we see it working out in the sense in between the sexes and in this idea of individual triumph and in a refusal to let go. And so I think it's interesting that this is happening within the individual relationships, while Dostoevsky himself has the overarching theme of socialism, Marxism. He's definitely taking the big narratives in political and social history and economic history and showing us how it plays out within a family. Alyosha is not experienced in love, he keeps saying, but he understands people, doesn't he? He can figure it out because his head's not in the clouds in some intellectual ivory tower like his brother Ivan. He actually understands people because he lives in active love. And so what he does is he brings everything out into the open. And Alyosha is such a saintly figure because if you read this carefully, he's bringing it out in the open. And you know what he's doing? He's making room for his brother. He's making space for Ivan to admit that he actually loves Katerina. Ivan loves Katerina. Is he going to admit it? Is he going to receive her love? Or would he prefer to hide under his own mask of lacerations? And of course, what is Katerina going to do? She seems determined to be on this destructive path with Dmitri. Now, I just want to briefly mention Alyosha says, I don't know anything about love. I think an interesting theory about Alyosha, it's not my own. This is a great book. This is Kontinos, Dostoevsky's Incarnational Realism. It's a Catholic look at the book. And he argues in this book that Alyosha, his weakness is his embarrassment, that Alyosha is too shy, too timid, too afraid of losing his purity, that he is not giving a proper sphere for development between himself and women, that he should actually allow for a healthier dynamic between himself and between women. And he should stop. He feels he's overly afraid of his feelings and that his excessive preoccupation with his purity is actually not virtue. That if he were truly virtuous, he would not be so terribly nervous. And that this embarrassment and this nervousness, Contino traces it and shows his moving. And sometimes it slows him down and he misses the mark and kind of loses his head because he's so embarrassed and so afraid of looking at anything that may smack of a lack of virtue. So Alyosha needs to mature in his own understanding of his own sexuality, Contino would argue. And I think it's an interesting argument because sometimes he misses the mark a little bit in his interactions with others. But the beautiful thing about Alyosha, and Contino traces this in all of his moving, he's always moving. You know, he may have a setback and think, oh, what did I do? What did I do? What's happening? But he keeps moving. He keeps moving. And he doesn't give up. If you follow this novel carefully, he has these constant setbacks. He keeps going back, doesn't give up. And that's what a real saint does. Realizes, gosh, maybe I said too much. Maybe I said too little, but let's keep going. And so I think it's an interesting dynamic about that. Now, let's think about the word laceration. You know, in page 132, it's Madame Holocaust who says, oh, if you could only imagine what's passing between them now, it's awful, I'll tell you. It's lacerating. So she brings up that word lacerating. And then if you remember, Alyosha says it, and he says he dreamt about this word or lacerating. He woke up with laceration in his mind. I think it would be helpful to look at the actual word for laceration. Here you see it. This is the Russian word for laceration or rupture. And it comes from the verb nadrivat, to rupture. And it is used so many times in this book. In it is self-imposed when it doesn't have to be there. And I think that's what Dostoevsky would like for us to analyze. There are some sufferings in this world that we cannot avoid. A very strong picture that emerges of suffering, of course, is the captain, Snegurov, and his family. They live in a world of real suffering. So we can't avoid that. But what is the suffering we put on ourselves that doesn't have to be there? And that happens a lot in this book. For example, Alyosha has an ugly wound on his finger. That wound foreshadows one that Lisa, she will later have a wound of her own laceration. There's some foreshadowing there. This is people who cannot deal with their own burden of freedom, and they don't know what to do with it. If you think back, do you remember those women wailing in the opening scenes of the novel? They would go visit the elder. They were very grieved about the loss of their children. That was also a version of this. We also, of course, have Katerina, who, instead of actually receiving love from a real life flesh and blood man who actually loves her, she wants to go and find some strange satisfaction in being rejected by the man who doesn't love her. We see that as well. Also, what about Snegurov? He is very humiliated. Why? Why is he so humiliated? Because he's poor. So it's hard enough to be poor, but then he adds that burden of humiliation to himself, because as we know, he's offered some concrete financial help, but his suffering turns into fierce pride, and he will not accept the help. That is a laceration also as well. And I think the way Dostoevsky writes about the captain at the end of this book is very telling. So apparently in the Russian, the way he wrote the words in the closing part of the book read like stage directions. One word has remained untranslated for some translators. I'll put it up here for you. I'm not even going to attempt to say this in Russian. You can see the word, but it means talking very fast. Why? And what does this have to do with the stage? Well, Snegurov is torn between two things. On the one hand, he has a natural impulse. I need this money. I need help. On the other hand, he is very concerned with living up to this certain image that he has of himself in his suffering. Dostoevsky is showing us sometimes when we suffer, it is so hard we can only bear it if we bear it under a particular mask, a way that we see ourselves suffering. So when this desire takes over the captain, he actually starts play acting. He actually performs like an actor on the stage. Read it again. You'll see wild gestures, grimaces, a shrill voice. He's not a good actor. And this is because he can't bear to not live under that mask of this type of heroic person who refuses to take help from somebody else. And that indeed is a very important form of laceration. Also, in looking at the dialogue and the back and forth phrases between the characters, each sort of showing their different ways of wearing their own laceration, I think that it's helpful to remember some scholars think Dostoevsky is borrowing from Chekhov. So we could call this book as a book of Chekhovian irony, because the characters say things back and forth to each other that are extremely ironic and don't always seem to work. And I think the best line in all of this, and we particularly see this with some of the ridiculousness with Lisa and her mom going back and forth. There's definitely some buffoonery the way they talk to each other, but be careful. Dostoevsky's not simple. Madame Holocaust, she's ridiculous. She says crazy things, but just like the patriarch of the family, in her own buffoonery, she often comes to the truth. So that's an interesting dynamic going on. But I love the irony at the very last sentence of the whole book. So if you remember, of course, there's a debacle with Alyosha and the money and the captain. He's tried to help, and it's been disastrous. It's so disastrous, it is almost comic. And so the narrator closes with this. This is the money notes. They were very much crushed and crumpled and had been pressed into the sand, but were uninjured and even rustled like new ones when Alyosha unfolded them and smoothed them out. After smoothing them out, he folded them up, put them in his pocket, and went to Katerina Ivanovna to report on the success of her commission. Just very, very dry there, dry irony. The narrator just letting us know that there were these grand ideas and look what happened. And so it's just very interesting, the irony and the back and forth. There's so much artistry going on there. But in the middle of all of that, as I've said, Alyosha, he suddenly can see what is happening. And several podcasts ago, we talked about seeing. Remember, I told you some characters see like the devil. They just see the top layer. They refuse to go beyond the flesh. And Dostoevsky says, when you only look at this level, you are not ascending out of this earth, and you're really working with the spirit of darkness. But when you spend time in silence and in prayer, now you have eyes to see the truth. And we see characters who can see. Well, Alyosha, in the middle of everything, he can see. He has an illumination. Now, remember this, because wait till we get to, I believe it's book 7, when he is going to have a vision. He's going to have renewed eyes, and he's going to see. And that is how Dostoevsky has the characters come to a renewal. It's with vision. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, moving on to question number 4, Alyosha and the schoolboys. This is so important because this is a novel about children. You know, it's amazing how, of course, the novel is focused on competing ideologies about how to run a state, how to deal with all the isms that we've talked about: socialism, capitalism, Marxism, nihilism. So it is a novel about competing ideologies. It is a novel about fathers and sons, but it is also a novel about children. Because Dostoevsky, as I've mentioned to you, who lost a child, who was concerned with the suffering of children, wanted to write a novel to present avenues of healing and a new way to approach how to better take care of children. And so this is very significant. And the hero of the novel, Alyosha, is presented as someone who's going to pass on his vision to some schoolboys. And these schoolboys are rough. We're seeing here a real portrait of schoolboys. It's not painted in any sort of naive way. And so we're definitely dealing with the real here. I think it's interesting to consider what we could call Dostoevsky's metaphysics of childhood. For Dostoevsky, the love of children is the test of man's goodness. At the end of the day, how are you going to treat a child is going to measure your own worth. It's interesting. I was recently reading a book by Heather King. She's a modern writer. She's very unique. She writes a lot about Saint Therese. She was a woman who had a wild past, who suffered from her abortions. And I thought it was so interesting when I've read several of her books. And when she finally decided to change her life and to repent, she said she was doing it for the children. She doesn't have her own children, but she decided she would change her life, give up selfishness for every child that she meets and every child that she hasn't met. And to me, it spoke to me of what Dostoevsky is talking about here. Are we willing to do it for the child? In a letter from 1879, Dostoevsky wrote that children humanize existence. And we're going to see it so beautiful. Later on, Dmitri will have a mysterious dream of a suffering child, and that's going to change him. Now, Dostoevsky believed children understand right and wrong very early, and we can't help but think of these portraits of the young Mitya, for example, how much he suffered without a mother, or the young Alyosha, seeing his mother grow hysterical at the abuse of her husband. So at a young age, children take in what's happening, but Dostoevsky knows they can be wicked also. And so we definitely see children in the novel who are naughty. Of course, there's Lisa. She is a naughty child. And fascinating, the grown-up Fyodor has childlike qualities. So it's very interesting how Dostoevsky plays with this. When we look at the writing, particularly at the end of the novel, with the suffering household of the captain, in Russian, the sentences are loaded with tender diminutives that are both nouns and adjectives. There's actually 8 in all, which apparently cannot be translated into English, but the way it's written in Russian would show a Russian reader such extreme tenderness that a father has for a child. So there's always this fatherly tenderness in the novel in the middle of so much fatherly neglect. Dostoevsky wants to give light to both aspects happening in modernity. So Alyosha and these schoolboys, it's not simple, right? He's caught in this difficult situation where the boy throws stones at Alyosha. And of course, they're connected to the Karamazov name because Dmitri did something hateful to the captain. And in the middle of that, Katerina wants to make amends. She wants to make amends with 200 rubles. But out of humiliation, the captain won't take it. So in the middle of all this ugliness and misunderstanding, Alyosha begins his mission to the world. It is his mission to work with these boys, and he's going to end up having a tremendous influence on them. Now, in the middle of working with these boys and the boys' roughness and the captain's pride, Dostoevsky is well aware this is because of the social question. So remember, I talked to you before, we have in Russia a new legal code, the freeing of the serfs, this and that, but people are living in poverty. And while Dostoevsky does not believe that socialism or Marxism are the answer, he has tremendous sympathy for the poor. And he is not writing off their suffering. I thought it would be interesting to look at this scene of pathos. Okay, let's look. I believe it's on page 144. This is in chapter 6, A Laceration in the Cottage. This is the captain's home. Now, this scene that we're looking at, this tremendous, maybe exaggerated form of suffering is common in Dostoevsky's novel. We often have tableaus of disenfranchised people suffering terribly from poverty and from sickness. We see that a lot in these novels. Okay, here I am in the middle of 144. Then Alyosha opened the door and crossed the threshold. He found himself in a regular peasant's room. Though it was large, it was cumbered up with domestic belongings of all sorts, and there were several people in it. On the left was a large Russian stove. From the stove to the window on the left was a string running across the room, and on it there were rags hanging. There was a bedstead against the wall on each side, right and left, covered with knitted quilts. On the one on the left was a pyramid of 4 print covered pillows, each smaller than the one beneath. On the other, there was only one very small pillow. The opposite corner was screened off by a curtain or a sheet hung on a string. Behind this curtain could be seen a bed made up on a bench and a chair. The rough square table of plain wood had been moved into the middle window. The 3 windows, which consisted each of 4 tiny greenish mildewy panes, gave little light, and they were close shut, so that the room was not very light and very stuffy. On the table was a frying pan with the remains of some fried eggs, a half-eaten piece of bread, and a small bottle with a few drops of vodka. Now, I want to talk to you about these few drops of vodka, because if you look at that description, it speaks to me of that active love that the elders always speaking of. When you are consciously trying to help people, you are going to notice the very small details, like there's no light in this room, or the air smells bad, or, oh my gosh, there's just one pillow. Those are the things you notice when you are descending into everyday life and helping people. And that's what Dostoevsky is painting so powerfully. He's saying this isn't an abstract vision of a Marxist or a socialist. This is real suffering. And I want to talk about the few drops of vodka. In the Russian, apparently the way it's written, it says, or it translates to, with faint remnants of earthly blessings. It's ironically euphemistic for vodka. This is just Dostoevsky, I think, maybe reminding us how the people are suffering so much. The vodka's essential. Vodka plays a big role in all of these Dostoevsky novels. It's a way for people to escape their suffering, but there's just a few drops. I just think that's so telling and so important for his portrait of suffering. And that's why Dostoevsky and the schoolboys is so important, because he's entering their world of really a world of lack. Also, if you keep in looking at this book as well, checked trousers are mentioned. This is very much emblematic of the novels of Dickens. Dostoevsky was pursuing a Dickensian feel in this chapter. And the captain is actually very much a Dickensian figure. And Dickens was immensely popular in 19th century Russia. So definitely a lot going on there. Moving on to number 5, I asked you to look at confusion, the topic of confusion within the family, and then the topic of confusion into the wider world. The topics of order, disorder, confusion, clarity were very important to Dostoevsky. Let's think about it. A murder is about to happen. Dostoevsky uses this impending murder as a suggestive symbol, not just of the family, but of the society that spawned the family. And he uses the metaphor of this Karamazov, shall we call it an accidental family. Why do I say accidental? Well, of course, think about it. There's the different moms, the different scenarios. One is emancipated, dies. One is hysterical, dies. Which brother belongs to who? Who lived with which relative? And then the father doesn't even remember he had the sons. Now they're thrown into a situation and they're brothers. Are they? Are they brothers? What is the nature of their brotherhood? Well, it is very tenuous, isn't it? Because they're an accidental family. The concept of real brotherhood and filial responsibility, it's been lost. And I think it's very much in the heart of Alyosha. He is always in his heart worried about his brothers, suffering, in anxiety, and thinking, oh, I have to go here, I have to go there. Oh, I forgot. I believe book 4 has that sentence. Dmitri was not at home. Where is he? Where's my brother? There's this constant looking out for the brother. There's anxiety there, though, because the ties have been broken. So this metaphor, Dostoevsky brilliantly uses to have it be a mirror for the bigger society, because Russian society has lost its unity, lost its purpose. And the figure of Ivan is the full figure of the son turning away from the father. Well, in Russia, remember, we mentioned this in our first podcast, there were attempts made on the life of the Tsar. So the Tsar and his people, their relationship has been severed. What is happening there? Dostoevsky says, oh, I see this happening in the state, in the society. And so he's using this troubled family as a microcosm of that as well. In society at large, narrow rationalism, egoism, materialism, and the loss of faith have affected modern man. And I want to share with you, I think this is really significant. There is a scholar named Leatherbarrow, and he argues the following, that Dostoevsky purposely made the hero of the novel collective. 3 brothers, right? We've talked about this. We have 3 brothers. One exemplifies reason, one emotion, and one faith. Now, wait a minute. I thought each person should have a balance of intellect, emotions, and faith. Why is it in 3 separate brothers? Why not have one brother with all 3? Well, according to this scholar, they represent the severe fragmentation and isolation that modern man faces. Because modern man has suffered in such unique ways through various events in the 19th century, and I'm certain Dostoevsky was prophesying about the 20th century, man is so cut off within himself that we can't have one character embodying all of it. Instead, we have to break it up into 3. to show how fragmented modern man is. And so now we have these three brothers. What a struggle to achieve fraternal unity. This is deeply symbolic. And for Dostoevsky, the integrated man would, of course, be, you guessed it, the Russian, the Slavophile, the Russian who has his intellect, his emotion, his faith, all integrated because he belongs to Mother Russia and her church. And he doesn't have any contradiction. He doesn't have to pit himself against the church or pit himself against science. It's all integrated, which was something medieval man did have, but we lost in modernity. And so Dostoevsky will use the plot of a murder, this accidental family, to really highlight these issues. So this is a story about the confrontation between order and disorder, harmony and chaos. And Dostoevsky himself wrote he wanted the novel to, quote, be the way to the church. Those were his words. He wanted to show the way. Well, of course, you can't show the way unless you first show the problems. That is why this novel is a novel of artistic and philosophical greatness, because this is a man who spent a lifetime reflecting on these burning issues. As we close number 5 and talk about confusion, I mentioned earlier some of Alyosha's confusion, right? He's overly sensitive, perhaps, in terms of discussing love. He is nervous about leaving the monastery and his mission in the world. And so, of course, if we look at that, we can't avoid the subject of Lisa. It's they have I think, a bewildering relationship. But there were definitely developments in this book. She is hysterical. She's embarrassed because of a letter that she wrote to Alyosha. On the one hand, it doesn't seem like Alyosha loves her. But on the other hand, it seems like they're fated to be married because the elder said he will marry. Now, what would their marriage be based on? Well, they have known each other since they were children. Again, I think it's interesting. Dostoevsky always wants to go back to childhood. Could there be something special about two people being children together and then getting married? Perhaps. Interesting. I won't say too much about what happens, but I think that is interesting. This also leads to just kind of one last comment I wanted to make. It doesn't really fit in with any of the questions, but I thought it was really interesting. If you look on page 141, which is chapter 7, A Laceration in the Drawing Room, there are some interesting words about hands. There is arguing going on with Katerina and Ivan. I'm on the first in the middle of the first paragraph on page 141. That's when Ivan does that strange quoting from German where he says, Den Dank Dame begehr ich nicht. Madame, I do not want your gratitude. So there's always has to be quoting from Schiller and so many authors. We could write a whole book about the quoting of text. But notice in the middle it says, but I am going far away and shall never come back. It is forever. I don't want to sit beside a laceration. But I don't know how to speak now. I've said everything. Goodbye, Katerina Ivanovna. You can't be angry with me, for I am 100 times more severely punished than you. If only by the fact that I shall never see you again. Goodbye. I don't want your hand. You have tortured me too deliberately for me to be able to forgive you at this moment. I shall forgive you later, but now I don't want your hand. Then he speaks the German phrase. He added with a forced smile, showing, however, that he could read Schiller, and read him till he knew him by heart, which Alyosha would have never believed. He went out of the room without saying goodbye, even to his hostess, Madame Holikov. Alyosha clasped his hands. So the movement of the hands is very important for Dostoevsky. He always has these little gestures within the characters that I think show us how real the human interaction is, how this is drawn out of real life. So I think it just gives us a lot to think about. Now, looking ahead to book 5, oh my goodness, how could I ever prepare you for book 5? Because this is the book. This is the book that has set off so many years of controversy. It will have the famous legend or poem of the Grand Inquisitor. So this is heavy reading for book 5. I think it's providential. We would be approaching it as we enter through the Triduum and into the Easter season, because it's heavy reading, but very important if we want to grasp the deeper meaning of the brothers Karamazov. So that is what we will look at next time. Until then, I wish you wonderful reading of the brothers Karamazov.